So, what if one of the Dead Sea Scrolls wasn't a religious text at all? What if it was actually a treasure map, leading to a fortune that could be worth billions today? We're diving into one of history's most fascinating and controversial documents, the Copper Scroll. Yeah, that doesn't exactly sound like scripture, does it? It sounds like it was ripped straight out of an adventure movie. But these are the real, actual opening lines of an ancient document that was meticulously hammered onto sheets of pure copper. And it's a document that has baffled scholars and inspired treasure hunters for decades. But here's the thing. This scroll wasn't just stumbled upon by a shepherd in a cave. The story of its discovery is a wild ride all on its own, and it sets it completely apart from every other Dead Sea Scroll we've ever found. So, back in 1952, archaeologists, not Bedouins, found this thing right where it had been left thousands of years ago. But they immediately hit a snag, a big one. It wasn't parchment or papyrus. It was two solid rolls of copper, so corroded and brittle that trying to unroll it would have turned it into green dust. This wasn't a job for historians anymore. It was a job for engineers. So in 1955, it was shipped off to Manchester for a high-stakes operation that would end up taking an entire year. Before anyone could even start to argue about what the scroll meant, they first had to figure out how to simply read it. And that presented two massive challenges. One was physical, and the other was linguistic. Just try to imagine the problem they were facing. The copper had oxidized for centuries, basically turning solid metal into something as fragile as a potato chip. Any normal attempt to unroll it would have shattered it into a million pieces. They needed a completely new plan. And the solution came from a Professor H. Wright Baker, whose plan was, well, it was ingenious, but also kind of terrifying. He decided, don't unroll it, cut it. So working with incredible precision, he coated the outside of the scroll in adhesive to hold it together, and then used a custom-built saw to slice the whole thing into 23 semicircular strips. I mean, can you imagine the pressure? One slip, and this one-of-a-kind piece of history is gone forever. But they did it. They actually did it. They could finally read the text. But as they pieced the strips together, they had this sinking realization. Solving the physical puzzle had only revealed a much, much deeper one. The language itself was a total enigma. For scholars, this text was a minefield. The Hebrew wasn't the biblical style they expected. It was a much later version, more like the language you'd find in the Mishnah. It was also packed with technical terms for things like containers and hideouts that don't appear anywhere in the Bible. The spelling was all over the place, and to top it all off, there were these random Greek letters just sprinkled throughout the text. This wasn't a sacred text, it was a technical inventory. So what exactly did this strange inventory describe? Treasure. Unimaginable, staggering amounts of it. And this discovery immediately split the academic world into two camps, sparking a fierce debate that is still going on to this day. The text itself is surprisingly simple. It's just a list, 64 different locations, each one describing hidden stashes of gold, silver, coins, and sacred items. But the quantities? Well, that's where things get absolutely wild. Okay, get this. Just one location, for example, describes a hiding place with 900 talents of silver. Another one casually mentions 65 solid gold ingots just buried somewhere. These aren't just little emergency caches. These are national-level fortunes. When you add it all up, even the most conservative estimates suggest the scroll describes over 60 tons of precious metal. 60 tons. Even though gold is the smaller part, the sheer weight of the silver alone is just immense. To put it simply, if this treasure is real, it's one of the largest lost fortunes in human history. And that, of course, is the big one. The billion-dollar, or I guess billion-talent question. Could these numbers possibly be real? This question split the academic world right down the middle. On one side, you have the believers. They argue it's a totally plausible inventory of the treasure from the Second Temple in Jerusalem, hidden right before the Romans sacked the city in 70 CE. They say the amounts, while huge, aren't impossible for a national treasury. But on the other side, you have the skeptics. They say, no way. The numbers are just too fantastical. For them, this is a work of folklore, a legend meant to inspire hope, not a literal treasure map. So for decades, the debate was stuck in this stalemate, real or fake. But recently, a third theory has come along that brilliantly reframes the entire question. It suggests that maybe it's both and neither. This new idea revolves around something called a memorial inventory. Now, that sounds pretty academic, but the idea is simple. It's not a list of things you can go find. It's a formal record created to make sure that sacred or valuable items are never forgotten, especially after they've been lost or destroyed. And this one idea just changes everything. What if the author wasn't creating a treasure map for the future, but a memorial for the past? A permanent, solemn record of all the sacred treasures that were plundered by the Romans. If that's the case, the goal was never about recovery. It was about remembrance. And when you look at it that way, suddenly the scroll doesn't seem so strange anymore. I mean, the ancient Greeks had a long tradition of creating public inventories of all the stuff in their temples, and they'd often inscribe them on stone or metal. It was a form of public accounting, a way to honor the gods. The copper scroll fits perfectly into this ancient practice. Okay, so this brings us to the final piece of this incredible puzzle, the material itself. Why copper? Why go through all that trouble to hammer this text into metal? In the ancient world, writing on metal was a huge deal. It meant something. We found Hebrew priestly blessings from the 7th century BC written on tiny silver plates, Rome's most important laws, the famous 12 tables, engraved on bronze, a critical Jewish treaty with Rome, recorded on bronze tablets. This wasn't some weird one-off act. It was a well-established tradition for preserving a culture's most vital information. And that's the key right there. The medium was the message. You didn't hammer a text into expensive, difficult-to-work-with copper to keep it a secret. No, you did it to make it last forever. It was a statement that this information was so important, so fundamental to the memory of a people, that it had to be immune to the decay of time. And that leaves us with this final, fascinating thought. Maybe we've been looking at the copper scroll all wrong. Maybe the treasure isn't actually buried somewhere out in the Judean desert. Maybe the real treasure is the scroll itself, not a map to what was hidden, but a powerful, defiant, and permanent monument to everything that was lost.